going on, guys? Today we're going to take a deeper look into the V2 Covenant. Now the V2 Covenant is the 6th Bally that Maxace has made to date. Now I've had 4 of those personally. I had a Scorpius, 2 DMGs, I still have my Pelican, and now this V2 Covenant. And it all started with the V1 Covenant. That was the first Bally that Maxace made. And that was a Bally that was pretty well received by the community. It was pretty unique. I mean, I actually lusted after one of the V1s when they first came out, but I missed the initial drop. So much to my pleasing, when they did this V2, I jumped on it. Now Maxace has proven to be an overwhelmingly consistent knife maker. I mean, they are China-based, so say what you will about that. It doesn't really bother me too much, just because of the consistency and the quality of the products that they put out. I mean, they've got their own style. Their fit and finish and construction and quality is always on point. Now, the V2 Covenant is coming in at $360. They're offering it with bronze ano, a blue anodization, a bead blasted finish, and I chose the stone-washed handle finish. Now they're also offering some crazy Timascus scales and wooden inlays and Timascus inlays, and there's also a Bowie profile blade, but I had only seen that with those limited Timascus versions. I haven't seen the Bowie profile available on any of the base models. Now, there are some differences between the V1 and the V2. I have never personally handled or owned a V2, so I'm going to do my best to highlight those differences, because I have noticed a few things. First of all, I noticed that on the V2, there's just a larger overall tang area. I mean, it's just bigger, which I don't really mind. I actually aesthetically like the larger tang. I thought the tang came a little bit too close to the pivots on the V1s and just looked a little weird, so the larger tang on the V2 actually is something I like. Now, it doesn't affect whether you get pinched or not. It doesn't really affect flipping, even though I've never handled a V1, but I have no issues with this tang, and aesthetically I do like the way it looks better. Now, I also noticed that on the V2 there are longer spacers. Now, they have them listed as exactly the same weight, the V1 and the V2, 4.93 ounces I think, but being that they're listed at the same weight, but this has larger spacers, I'm wondering where that weight was taken out of to equal the same weight. Or if it didn't, I'm not exactly sure, because I don't own a V1, but that's another thing I noticed. One other thing is that they went to a single body screw and a centering pin construction in the spacers. On the V1, I know that the double body screws were directly tapped and threaded into the spacers. Now on this, there's a like a sex bolt pivot barrel style construction for that single screw and a centering pin, which is much better than having it threaded directly into the tie. I would much rather have a steel pivot barrel or sex bolt style construction. It's just much less chance of anything stripping or cross threading, just overall stronger. Now they also say there is a revised Zen pin location, which to my best guess, because of the larger tang, now your tang cup and your Zen pin nipple is just a little bit further away from the pivots. So in turn, your Zen pins have to be just a little bit further away from the pivots for everything to match up together and line up nice and straight. And also, the top carbon fiber inlay shape has been revised just a little bit, just so it flows a little bit better around the exposed Zen pin screws. But for $360, you're getting a hell of a Bally. I mean, like any Bally, out of the box, the tuning was a little wacky. So after I did that unboxing video, I went upstairs and got her tuned up perfectly, blew Loctite everything down. And now it's absolutely perfect, and I haven't touched anything since that night. But you're also getting a trainer blade and that full extra assortment of hardware. Now, I haven't installed the trainer blade and flipped with it, but from what I'm told, it weighs exactly the same as the live blade, so kudos to them for making sure that the trainer blade wouldn't impede flipping too much, just because that Pelican trainer blade, it was a cool concept and idea, but it was just almost unflippable. Now, I was also given a set of the brass spacers with mine as well, but this already feels pretty handle heavy as it is for my taste, so going even more handle biased than this would just be too far away from my preferred style. So I'll talk about the balance and the flipping later on, but it's handle heavy enough for me right now. So not really going to talk about those brass spacers because that's just going to be way more handle heavy than what I prefer. Now there's a whole lot of good things to like about the V2 Covenant. It's a sandwich construction Zen pin style bally that rides on caged ceramic bearings, and one thing I've come to expect from Maxace is that their quality of construction and their tolerances are always going to be on point. Another thing I like that Maxace always does, or doesn't do, I should say, is they never crown any of their spines. They always just use like this deep, healthy chamfer that follows the whole way around the tang. And to me, it doesn't feel any worse than crowning, but from an aesthetic perspective, I do like the way it looks a lot more. It's very similar to like the chamfer that Hom uses on his blades. He doesn't ever crown any of his spines. He uses a similar chamfer, and it feels just as good to me, and I like the way it looks a whole lot more. Now, another thing I really like about this bally is look how big and beefy those Zen pins are. I mean, it's just a really large diameter Zen pin, and you're also getting the exposed Zen pin screws, which I don't actually mind because almost every other bally that comes out nowadays has hidden Zen pins. So keeping in line with the original Covenant and leaving the screws exposed I actually like, but I really like how big the diameter of the Zen pins themselves is. I mean, that's just going to mean for greater Zen pin longevity. It's going to feel sturdier, it's going to sound better, much less chance of any flat spots getting worn in. You're also getting M390 blade steel, which is always a win. And another thing I noticed is that the inlays, they look a little bit more flush against the handle, a little more low profile. On the V1, it looks like they're raised up just a little bit more than on the V2s, which I guess I would have to handle a V1 to see what I liked more, but the inlays on this feel really, really good. I noticed a really cool latch gate system they're using. It's two ceramic ball bearings that are pressed into the inside of each handle slab, almost the same way a detent ball is on a folder. Now, time will tell how those hold up to the abuse of flipping and constant drops, but I just thought it was a pretty cool idea, pretty cool feature. So the only bad things I can even say about this knife is just like nitpicky stuff to begin with. But after never handling a V1, and even though I read the specs and dimensions before I bought this, it just felt way bigger and heavier than I expected it was going to be just from like looking at pictures and stuff. Now I wear a large to extra large glove size, so I have rather big hands, so it doesn't bother me one bit. I actually like having some bigger and heavier ballies in my collection. But for a person who has smaller hands, that may be something worth considering. Also, these handles just feel a little bit blocky. The corners just feel a little bit sharp and grabby. Now, when I had my Scorpius, that had like this beautiful compound chamfer. It was like a double chamfer that went the whole way around the handles, and that felt really good. If they would have used that style chamfer on these handles, this would be almost a perfect bally. The only other couple nitpicky things I found were there were a couple blemishes that mine arrived with. Now, if you can see on the end of this handle here, there were two scratches that were like clearly after the fact scratches. Now, even though I picked the stonewash finish, these are like two scratches that stand out from the rest of the stonewash. And there's in between these inlays here, there's this weird rub mark. If I can get it to focus. But mine arrived with just those couple little blemishes. And also one of my carbon fiber scales has like the tiniest little void in it, or inlays I should say, right there. It's not a big deal. It's not sharp and it doesn't affect the way it flips at all, but for the collectors who may be looking at this knife to acquire, those little finish things may be something worth considering for the collector. But overall, there are very few bad things about this Bali. So quickly before we move on, I just want to mention that these inlays, they've still got some milling marks left over in them. If you can see those diagonal lines going across the inlays, that's milling marks left over from when these were machined out. Now, it's not a big deal, but it's worth mentioning because it would have been such an easy 5-minute fix to get that sorted out before these left the factory. It's the only reason I mention it. Other thing is this pocket clip, which was so close to being a home run. I mean, it's pretty lightweight and it's low profile and not too much in the way. And I know I'm pretty fussy when it comes to pocket clips. And this one was pretty close, but it just doesn't function well as a pocket clip. If you see this sharp notch here, that thing grabs going in your pocket and catches on its way out. You almost have to like lift up with your fingernail on your way in or out of your pocket to even use it. So suffice to say that the pocket clip's gonna probably end up coming off. The V2 Covenant probably does best as a flipper. And for those of you that like a more handle biased Zen pin style Bali that rides on bearings, you guys are really gonna like this one. Now with the revised Zen pin location and the larger overall tang area, I was waiting to see if pinching was gonna become any type of an issue with this Bali, but it's really not at all. I usually notice that it's more commonly tang pin style Balis that have that pinching issue. They'll usually have a tang cup that's cut into the side of each handle slab, and it's when that tang cup comes around the horns, that's usually what causes pinching, at least in my experience. Now the inlays in these handles feel really, really well. They're set in pretty flush against the handles. They don't really stick up at all and definitely don't feel bad when you're flipping them. They offer just the perfect amount of grip. Good for helping you orient when you're doing any type of fanning manipulation. Now, even though it's not sharp in any way, when you're doing any type of chaplain-based manipulation, you can feel this notch here. It's not sharp, it doesn't hurt at all, it's just I can feel it. It's not bad in any way, it's just there. The pocket clip is pretty lightweight and pretty out of the way, which is upsetting because if it functioned as a pocket clip, I would love to leave it on, but it's probably going to end up coming off. Now, when I first got this was a little bit more handle biased than I had expected it was going to be, especially considering that you can buy separately brass spacers for this to add in even more handle bias if you want, which it's already 2 handle bias as it is with the tie spacers for my taste. But who knows, that's all subjective. Somebody else may think that it's too neutral with the tie spacers and want to add that extra bit of handle weight. All this stuff is subjective. Now I brought out 2 other Balis for comparison. First we're going to bring out the Pelican just because this is the other high-end offering that Maxace offers. Now, in terms of comparison, these are almost on totally different planets. I mean, on one hand, you have a Zen pin style, sandwich style construction, and on the other, you have channel and tang pins. Both of them ride on the same style cage ceramic bearings, but in every other measurable way, they're just so different. They're both absolutely amazing. You have the Pelican is actually a little bit smaller than the Covenant, and a little bit lighter, and a little less handle bias. I actually like the Pelican a little bit better as a flipper. The handles on the Covenant do feel better than the than the Pelican handles, but just in terms of balance and overall flipping, I like the Pelican a little bit more. But the Covenant is still an absolutely amazing flipper. Like I said, that's probably the area that this Bally does best. Now I also brought out my standard alt blade Alpha Beast, just because in terms of balance, these are very similar Ballies. I'll say the Covenant may have just a tiny bit more handle bias than my Alpha Beast does. But even in terms of price, these are pretty similar. I mean, I think Alpha Beasts are $370, these are $360, and you're getting a trainer blade and a pocket clip and all that extra hardware and the sheath if all that stuff matters to you, which I actually like having all the extra hardware. I mean, even for all my Ballies, I typically have a whole assortment of extra hardware and washers and bushings, screws, body screws, end pin screws, pivot barrels. I try to have extras of everything that I need for any of my Ballies. So being that it comes with a whole assortment of extra hardware, I actually really like. Granted, the Alpha Beast is made in the United States, if that's something that that you take into account, because that is a big deal for some people. But for right around that same price range, you're getting a very comparable, very stout flipper. I mean, Covenant is no slouch, not by any stretch of the definition. But again, it's a more handle biased Bally, and it's on bearings. Some guys adamantly don't like bearings. I personally love bearings. I mean, not that it's undoable, but it's pretty hard and a pretty fickle process to have bushings with these types of tolerances. That's the only reason that I like bearings so much. Some guys will say that they over accelerate when you're flipping, and I mean they can, but it's something that's easy to adjust for. You get kind of used to it pretty quickly. But as always guys, thanks for watching, thanks for showing up. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Till next time, peace.